All right, we are going to get started. As usual, we're going to sit for a couple of seconds here and just watch the participant list tick up. We are happy to have you on our HMIS lead call today. This is being recorded, so you will be able to access this content later, and there are a couple of new points to make right here at the start. You should be on this call because you're an HMIS lead or HMIS system admin. We also have had an uptick in people signing up for our HMIS lead hub, and that is because, of course, the ESG CSV uploading that's due for CARES Act funding is bringing some more folks into our HMIS world, which is great. You also may be somebody who you're invested in the HUD SNAP data strategy in your community. So you're a COC lead, or you're an agency provider, or somebody who is invested in making sure HMIS data quality is top and good to go for reporting that's required for your community. So there's a lot of people that are used to these monthly calls that have been on month in and month out. We also have quite a few people who are new to our monthly meetings. So looking forward to talking with you all today and sharing all the content that we have for you. Just a few more housekeeping items. If you need to go see what we've said in the past, we might actually reference past webinar content, or in some of our answers, we might link you to the months that we talked about a certain thing. So the way to go find those is to log into the hub, the System Admin Hub, and find the monthly webinar archive. Everything's saved there by year and month, and you can get past PowerPoint slides, you can get links to the recordings that are posted on YouTube, you can see an FAQ from every call, so a lot of very helpful information on the hub. During this call, you all are muted. The participants or the presenters that you see on your screen on video are not. Everyone else is. If you're having technical issues, audio issues, you can type that into the Q&A box. We also want all of your questions. The most beneficial part of this hour and a half for you and for us is to hear what issues you're having with the content being shared and how we can clarify what's going on for you locally. So please submit your questions to the Q&A box. We will answer them if we can and as quickly as we can while we're in the call. You may be told in one of your answers to submit an AAQ. So to do that, you would go to the HUD Exchange, find the Ask a Question page, and when you're submitting your question, choose HMIS as what your question is related to. That'll help us triage things appropriately. And just remember, if you can, to include kind of context for us from either the slide deck number or just the topic that we were talking about. We're going to cover quite a few different things today. So as you're asking your questions both during the call and if you submit an AAQ later, give us some context about what your question is referring. Okay. So to introduce all the lovely faces on the screen today, we have Fran Ledger and William Snow. These are our friends from HUD, and they're here to give us their HUD expertise. We also have myself and Mary Schwartz from Apt Associates, and Jesse Jorstad is joining us today from Apt Associates, sitting in. You'll see Jesse join these calls in the future on a regular basis. And we also have Meredith Alspot and Michelle Budzik from the Partnership Center here to present on the ESG CV upload process. Brian, of course, Brian Marco-Priori from Cloudburst is here helping us answer all your questions and providing great content. And Melissa is in the background, not on the screen. She's here from C4 Innovations helping us with the technical back end of Adobe Connect. So welcome everyone, thanks for being here today. We're going to go over our usual roll call of agenda items, HUD updates, Fran has some information for us there, including reporting deadlines. I'll go over some lead updates for you from the federal partners. We have some LSA data quality stuff we can go over if we have time, but we're going to spend the bulk of our time on the hot topic of the day, which is our ESG-CV upload training that Michelle and Meredith are going to provide to us, as well as a walkthrough of the SAGE upload system, if you haven't seen it yet. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fran and let her get going on HUD updates.
Thank you, Mary. I won't spend a long time today, but I want to thank you all for joining us. I very much appreciate it, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing in your communities, and also thank you to the TA providers that are joining us today to help us out. I'm going to start with the ESG-CV notice. I just have two primary things I want to talk about. One specifically is around the use of this funding towards HMIS expenditures. There's two things that were in the original waiver that it discussed, and one of them was that an ESG recipient could spend the funds for those things that would typically be spent for HMIS ESG-related expenses. But it also extended it to those things that would typically be covered by an HMIS lead. What we see now in the notice is it actually makes an additional expansion, and it covers other things that are typical HMIS expenses beyond those that are just for ESG participants in ESG activities. And so the intention is that then you can support kind of all of the coordinating activities that you're doing around COVID to support individuals that are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. So keep that in mind. You can go to the notice to take a look at that. There's also the ESG eligibilities activities document. It's listed in the resources at the very end of this presentation, and it actually has two tables in there, two columns, and you can look through and see what all those eligible activities are, and that can be helpful to take a look at. The second thing is there was a 60-day waiver in there for projects getting started with coordinated entry, developing standards, and also HMIS startup. That period is over with, and I just want to be clear with that. That was intended for when folks started up early on, between January 21st and June 30th. So that time has passed. That does not extend beyond June 30th, so I do want to make you aware of that. There was recently a webinar that was conducted. If you go to that link that you see on your screen right now for the webinar, the transcripts are not up yet, but they will be shortly, and you'll be able to go and watch a recording and look at the transcripts and get more information on the full notice and all the information in there. So I encourage you to do that. There's also a link to the notice. I also want to make an announcement about the Fall NHSDC Conference. A notice went out on the HUD Exchange about that. It's a virtual conference. It's going to cover almost the entire month. HUD has 8 regular sessions, and we've also got 2 ESG CV presentations we're going to do. Actually, it's exciting. We have Norm doing a plenary on the CARES Act and HMIS, and we also will have one on reporting, and William and Meredith will be presenting on that one. So go ahead and take a look at that. ESG CV funds can be used for that in addition to what would be normally allowed. It is a HUD-approved conference, so you can spend HMIS funds for that conference. And there's a link to the NHSDC website, and you can go ahead and register there. And the last thing is this is the timeline that we've been putting up month to month, so this shouldn't look new if you've joined us before. It has some of the main reporting time frames that we have coming up. Just to remind everybody, we're still on the path for LSA submissions to start in early October. We don't have a hard deadline right now, but we'll put something out in an announcement soon to let you know when we're going to start those. We told folks we would give you guys a couple weeks notice, so you should be hearing from us soon on that. Also with the PIT count, we do get a lot of inquiries around the PIT count. We haven't made a decision conclusively on that, but we are in discussions around it, and you will also hear something from us around that. Safety is obviously a huge concern for us, so we're taking all those kinds of things into consideration, the health and safety of individuals, to make sure that everybody's protected during this time. So that's it for the timeline, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran. If people have questions about NHSDC, they should go through the NHSDC website, correct? And link to the contact information there? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So just a few updates for you guys from the federal reporting perspective, federal partner perspective. So PATH report updates. The vendors have been given a version 3.4 to program, but it came a little late in the game than we usually would expect. So PATH has allowed for the current PATH APR to be available and uploadable until November 30th to PDX. But after November 30th, so starting December 1, version 3.4 of the PATH APR is required to be uploaded to PDX. So I'm just going to kind of repeat. Between October 1 and November 30th, if you're using 3.3, you don't have access to 3.4. Oops, I just made the screen really big. If you don't have access to 3.3, thank you, 3.4, you're going to need to upload your APR version 3.3 until November 30, but you want to make sure you do a prefix, when you save that report and get it ready for upload to PDX, you want to prefix it with V3.3. Prefix V3.4 if that's the version you're uploading. Ask your vendor if you don't know which one you're uploading so that you can prefix these reports appropriately before you upload them to PDX. The version 3.4 changes include a change to Q13B. This is the number of new persons contacted who could not be enrolled because the provider was unable to locate the client. Question 26K, which is adding a DV history for adults only. Question to the PATH APR, there are a few renumbering and updates made to some other questions, and of course data standard responses were updated throughout. So if you can, as HMIS leads, right, help your PATH grantees upload the right PATH APRs to PDX and make sure that the prefix nomenclature that we've described here is being added appropriately to those reports depending on which programming spec you're using. And then of course starting December 1, there should only be one spec that you're using from HMIS, version 3.4. Anything else I missed there, Meredith, to go over? Nope. Okay, RIE grantees have started their upload process for the fiscal year, so they're currently in the middle of an upload cycle if their RIE grants end in fiscal year 20. So they've been getting communication from the RIE upload site, the RIE repository site. They're being reminded and asked to upload those CSV files. It's the standard fiscal year 2020 V1.8 CSV specifications. There are error messages that they'll get right away if their files don't pass. Just a reminder to please be supportive of your RIE grantees. They are in the middle of a they've only been able to upload once this fiscal year. We didn't have a spring upload per usual, so there's probably lots of data quality issues to address for the whole upload, and we really need HMIS lead support for those RIE grantees that are uploading currently. A lot of them aren't quite even sure how to pull their CSV reports out of HMIS, so please pay attention to the RIE grantee needs right now. The September 7th through 25th period is for those, again, that end in fiscal year 2020. Their grants are totally done this year, and they don't have any ability to, like, charge RIE for the time to upload past the end of the grant cycle. So that's why the upload is available for them right now. Everyone else whose RI grants continue on beyond into the next fiscal years, they have between October 26th and November 16th to upload. So their time is coming, and they too will be looking for support from their HMIS leads to get their uploads done. And the RI help desk is listed there on your screen. If there's any issues, we'll be happy. RI folks want to hear from anyone who has a question or issue getting access to the RI repository. It is new, it's changed and different than it has been in years past this time around, so just be mindful of your RI grantees right now. And likewise, be mindful of your VA grantees. There are fiscal year uploads happening across all our federal partners, of course. So the last upload of the fiscal year is for SSVF-funded VA grantees will start October 1, and it's the last time this year to get all the data in and correct. We had all but 2 uploads completed for the last upload earlier this month, and it was easy errors that could have been fixed pretty easily. So again, just pay attention to all of those federally funded partners using HMIS to do their federal reporting that's required. It's the end of the fiscal year, and folks are getting their data in. If you have any VA questions, there's your help desk link there. And I think with that, unless any of that caused any questions we need to stop for, a reminder one last time, we won't talk again as a group until the October 1 deadline has passed to get your coordinated entry data elements added to HMIS. So just a few reminders. That means 4.19 and 4.20, those new data elements that were introduced with fiscal year 2020 last year. They were supposed to be due on April 1st. We pushed the deadline back, thank you HUD, another 6 months so that folks could address the COVID issues going on. We are now at the doorstep of the deadline. If you are funded by HUD with a COC, CE, SSO grant, you need to use HMIS to collect data on all served clients and report using HMIS, using the APR specifications. We've linked you to the APR specifications there. And remember, the point of the SSO, CE, SSO APR is that it's going to look at any of those projects across your system in which this data are being recorded and pull all clients in your CE system according to the recording those data elements 4.19 and 4.20 in your system, pull them into that APR. So it's not just on your maybe small pool of HUD-funded clients, but the CE APR is looking at your whole system, and if you have HUD-funded CE projects going on, you'll need to add those CE data elements to HMIS to make that reporting happen. Reports will come due a year from now, so that APR won't be due using HMIS data until October 1, 2021, but you want to start now getting the data in. I will pause there as we move topics to the next section of ESGCV upload training. Any questions, Brian, that we need to verbally address right now?
Always. So are the new coordinated entry data elements required for those who do not receive COC SSO funding?
Nope, HUD can't really require that of anybody they aren't funding directly. It's good to have, right? And it's possible that you can kind of retrofit these elements into your CE systems and even take advantage of some of the reporting that the APR might allow you to do on your CE system, but unless you have that HUD-funded COC, CE, SSO grant, you are not required to use HMIS.
All right, and what's the status of the coordinated entry APR release?
It's up there. It's, the CE APR specifications are linked there in the slide for you, and it is posted on HUD Exchange. It might change some with the new data elements, but it's not due yet. It's not actively required to submit using the CE APR specification. So if you're doing SAGE reporting for APR for your CE-funded COC HUD-funded CE projects, right? You're still doing that narrative APR that has been required and will be required up until October 1, 2021. And if there are any data standard changes that go live October 1, 2021, which, you know, we're starting that process of fiscal year 2022, data standard potential changes could occur, in which case the APR specifications would be updated to align with those changes at some point that it matches up with data collection timeframes and reporting is due. So at this point, the CE APR specification that is linked in the slide is the one that we anticipate you would be submitting after October 1, 2021, because you've started October 1, 2020 collecting your CE data elements in HMIS. Meredith, any clarifications there?
Just a couple points to add for a few follow-up questions that came in. There's not any sort of transition APR for coordinated entry. There is the one that is currently active in SAGE, and then there will be a new one on October 1, 2021. So there's that piece of it. Vendors have received the specifications. I believe many of them are programming the report, but it doesn't, like we've said, become effective until October 1, 2021. So they may not have it available to you since it is not due to be used until next year.
Yeah, part of the delay of putting it from April 1 data collection requirement to October 1 allowed for some delay in the programming too, which was needed. Okay. Barring any further questions, let's go over to Meredith and Michelle for ESGCV reporting.
Sure thing. Thank you. So we're going to spend some time again talking about ESGCV reporting. Those of you that were here last month, you know, we did talk about this last month also, but I think I heard 60 some odd new requests for participation in this call, so I know we've got some new folks, and we also know that it doesn't hurt to say these things a couple times. So here we go. We're going to start just with some basic roles and responsibilities. We know there's some confusion about sort of who's who in the zoo here, so we're going to talk through some of those points to begin with and just do some definition stuff. So when we're talking about ESG, we're talking about the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. When we're talking about ESG-CV, we're talking about the Emergency Solutions Grant under the CARES Act. So we're talking about ESG-CV reporting today. We will talk a lot about the recipient, and when we're talking about the recipient, the ESG-CV recipient, we're talking about the unit of local or of government who is receiving the ESG-CV award from HUD. So that's a city, that's a county, that's a state, that's a territory. That is who we're talking about when we say ESG recipients. There are also subrecipients. The subrecipient is the one who is the entity who receives the funding from the recipient. Generally, that's going to be a direct service provider, but sometimes it may also be a pass-through entity. The funding may come from a state ESG recipient to a local unit of government who then further subawards that funding to a direct service provider. In those cases, we would call those folks sub-subrecipients. So those aren't super common, but they're definitely a thing that's happening out there. The sub-subrecipient who is always going to be a service provider that is getting the funding for operating the actual programs. Each one of these different entities that we're going to talk about today have a different role in regards to reporting and in regards to reporting on ESG-CV specifically. So when we're talking about the recipient, again, they are the one receiving the funding from HUD. They are awarding the funding to the subrecipients. They are the entity that is entering data into SAGE. They are identifying every single project they have funded in SAGE. They are adding contact information. They are reporting on financial information. They are reporting on their unique activities. They are recording all of that information into SAGE. The direct service provider, which would be the subrecipient or the sub-subrecipient, has nothing to do in Sage. They are simply recording data, running their project, and recording data in HMIS or their comparable database if they are a victim service provider. So they're just doing, typical normal data entry in HMIS, making sure they've got the good data quality in place, making sure that their data is complete and accurate, all that sort of stuff. They're doing that data collection piece. The HMIS lead staff or a victim service provider is the entity that is going to be responsible for generating the CSV reports from your HMIS or comparable database and uploading it to Sage. So again, you don't need access. HMIS leads, victim service providers don't need access to Sage in order to do this. And what we're going to look at here in a few minutes is the special reporting portal that you have access to in Sage to do your uploads. And then finally, again, the recipient, they are recording all this information in Sage. They are looking at the uploaded files that you, the HMIS leads or VSPs, have added. And then they're the ones that are ultimately responsible for hitting submit. Sometimes they don't do that, but we're going to work on that. And they're going to actually hit submit and get that report into HUD to meet their reporting requirements. So thinking about these different roles and understanding who's who here in this effort that we're putting forth, we want to get a little more information from those of you on the call today to make sure that we're clear in how we're responding to your questions, how we're tailoring information to you, to really understand what your role is. We know that in some limited cases that the ESG recipient is also an HMIS lead. So we want you to take a minute here, and I think Melissa will pull up the poll for us, to answer the question, are you both the ESG recipient and HMIS lead? Yes, no, don't know. If you respond yes, please enter the name of your recipient jurisdiction or organization in the question field below. I think you see both of them, so that we know where those where you all are located. Okay, and I think we can leave that up because it looks like that we're still missing quite a few responses. We're going to leave that up just for a minute, but I do want to keep us moving in our content here. If you haven't answered that, please do. And please make sure you're entering your information there. Okay, so we sort of talked about who's who in this effort here. We're going to talk a little bit about who does what, a little bit more about who does what. So in Sage, the recipient is going to be the one who is responsible for for setting the reporting start date. Michelle's going to walk through that in detail here in a few minutes because we've gotten a lot of questions about how we establish a reporting start date. But the recipient is setting that date. The recipient is recording every single project that they funded with ESG CV funds in Sage. And they're also then telling, they're responsible for recording in Sage what the project, when the project starts and when the projects are ending. So they're creating, when they're adding that information in there, they're adding a start date and an end date as applicable. Sage is ultimately what is responsible for bundling all of this project information together. Sage is taking all of those individual projects by component types, by those dates, and creating these bundles within Sage. Sage will then email you, the HMIS lead, an email that we'll look at in a second that tells you all of the projects and the dates that are required to be included in a particular bundle. So you'll receive an email from Sage telling you that there is an emergency shelter bundle, for instance, and it is for this date period, and these 7 projects must be included in it. And like we've said before, follow what Sage is instructing you to do. Pull the information as Sage is telling you to. When you receive the email from Sage, you're going to have 24 hours to make sure that it's right. So As soon as you receive that email, you're going to want to make sure that the project names are right, that the date range is right. If you have questions, you'll need to contact your ESG recipient as quickly as possible so that they can correct that, and that Sage will send you the bundle information correctly. You're going to generate those reports based on the information Sage tells you, and then you're going to upload that information into Sage using the reporting portal. So that's sort of the general high-level overview of that process, and that's what we're going to walk through in a little more detail here in a minute. Okay, Melissa, yeah, thank you. You can take that poll down. I want to turn it over to William Snow at this point, though, to talk about some new information that we wanted to share with you based on the release of the ESG-CV notice.
All right. Thank you, Meredith. So last time we spoke about temporary emergency shelter. It was prior to the notice being released, and we had shared that the way you should be thinking about temporary emergency shelter is it is a facility that does not meet habitability. So when the notice was released, that changed slightly. I want to note before we talk about what the change is, that we think the guidance we gave you before, at least for HMIS project setup and how you'll report the project, has not changed. Some of the nuances about how it will be documented has changed, and so I want to walk through that for just a minute. There is a definition in the notice. I'm actually not going to read the definition. I want to focus on 3 core elements to help you get to, does this facility or part of its facility count as temporary emergency shelter? So these are the 3 elements. They're on the screen. I'm going to read them to you. I have emphasis in the 3 elements, and those are the things that we'll talk a minute about. You should be honed in on those pieces. So all or part of a structure is used to provide shelter to individuals and families displaced from their normal place of residence or sheltered, unsheltered locations due to a natural disaster or public health emergency. So read just the bolded parts, right? Whole or part of a structure used to provide shelter to address the public health emergency. That's criteria number 1. Criteria 2, the public health authority has to say there is a need for this kind of non-congregate assistance. So it is not going to be something like the public health authority saying, we need X, Y, and Z temporary shelters built. I don't anticipate any health authority saying that. But a public health authority saying all congregate living shelters need to take special measures to ensure that people are safe from the spread of COVID-19, that type of statement works. And often they'll use that very broad language because they're not just covering the homeless situation, they're covering elderly living situations or retirement settings or other types of even jail settings at times. So any type of congregate shelter. So there needs to be documentation that the local health authority made some sort of statement that there is a need for special provisions for congregate situations. So that's criterion number 2. Number 3, they have to have actually used the facility during the applicable time period to address COVID-19. So the applicable time period is no earlier than January 21st, 2020, and under the notice, it can't extend past January 31st, 2022. So if somebody put up a temporary shelter on January 1st and wanted to be reimbursed, that's a clear no. We will not reimburse for that, certainly not for that period. If it had to be further adapted for COVID-19, that's something we could consider, and you should probably send an AAQ for that. It's possible that you'll have trailers set up if you're in California or if you're in Louisiana, and those are set up for the flood or for the fire and not for COVID-19. It's possible that those will not count. Now, most of those disasters actually have a COVID-19 statement, and that's where you'll rely on the public health authority saying that this is part of that response. But I want to be clear that these three criteria, all three of them have to be met. Now, if you are, well, we'll go through some examples, actually. I'll lean on Michelle to go through some of the examples to kind of remove some of the fear from earlier statements. If these three criteria apply, the jurisdiction simply doesn't have to do habitability. It's not that a facility failed habitability or failed environmental. It's that they just don't have to do it. And so this is where we want to be clear that this habitability piece is simply one of, do you need to do the review at all, as opposed to did it fail the review. And I'll turn to Michelle to talk about some of the circumstances you've already gone through and how they apply to this temporary emergency shelter definition.
Thanks, William. The HMIS project setup guidance that is in this link here really has not changed. And the new definition of temporary emergency shelter that was released in notice really lined up with that quite well. So as we kind of took a look at it and unpacked everything, it was pretty clear that if you had done what the first guidance said, you're going to be in good shape here. They didn't change things from that. So first of all, let's talk about what's an emergency shelter. An emergency shelter under ESGCV, or ESG for that matter, is the shelter that was there before COVID and is going to be there after COVID. It's the one that's ongoing. It's the regular kind of shelter that you're used to serving, whether it's a mass shelter or a night-by-night shelter or an entry-exit shelter. It doesn't matter. It's an emergency shelter, right? If you had to close that in your community because people felt like there wasn't enough social distance, or the staff was panicking, or for whatever reason related to COVID, you said, we're going to close the shelter and everybody's going to go to hotels, which was a strategy that was suggested by lots of people nationally. If that's what you did, then the guidance that you got originally said you should keep entering those people in your emergency shelter. So all you did was think of those hotel beds as the same beds you had in emergency shelter, and you should have kept entering them there that way. That concept was developed so that you didn't have to open and close programs, you didn't have to enter and exit people. We tried to make this as simple for you, both as HMIS leads and as shelter providers in this kind of weird environment, to be able to continue to do things as you did. So those are emergency shelters. If you by chance created a hotel-motel program for those people in your HMIS system, it's still going to be an emergency shelter count, right? It just is. It's an emergency shelter. It's not a temporary emergency shelter. It's a regular emergency shelter. The other thing that lots of folks did was add overflow beds. So all of a sudden, people from the streets were coming in, or they were having to do some kind of shuffling around, and distancing required that the shelters realigned and put in overflow beds. If you put in overflow beds, they're treated just like the regular shelter. They just had overflow, and your inventory for overflow beds just happened to change during the period that you did that. You're still going to report all of the people that are in emergency shelter for ESGCV. You don't just report the people in overflow beds. You report everybody in the shelter. So it should be real easy. That shouldn't have been a new project. It should be the same thing you're used to doing for winter shelters or hot shelters or whatever. When you look at a temporary emergency shelter, we're really looking at adding a new shelter to an existing organization or adding a new organization with a new shelter. So think of a temporary emergency shelter for first and foremost as something that wasn't there before, right? And it's not this adding on to the existing shelter that we're talking about. It's really something new going on. So in some places there were folks that had to acquire or renovate a building and make that like an old hotel, retrofit it for a shelter to follow CDC recommendations and guidelines. You don't expect that building to be used in the future. It's not a new shelter in your inventory. It's a shelter that opened just for this COVID stuff, and so that's a temporary emergency shelter. Or we know there were places also across the country that had to put people that were currently in shelters in some kind of other building because they either had COVID-19 or had the symptoms and were being tested and really needed to be isolated. And so we know there were places that did that. That could have been treated two ways. It could have been treated as an emergency shelter where you set up a new shelter for it, or it could have been treated as a medical facility where you exited people from your shelter to that medical facility and then brought them back to your shelter when they're finished. Either way, they retain their homeless status, and that's kind of what we were worried about. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at as temporary shelters. I'm just going to answer the question before you ask it. When it's outside and it looks like a tent and feels like a tent and smells like a tent, it is a street outreach program. It's not a shelter. So in general, those kinds of things that are like those outside really, you just went and put up tents for people and got to buy tents under COVID money. That's cool that you did that, but there's no way that that's a shelter. So if you came up with a huge mass thing, maybe HUD would look at that and give you a buy on that being a shelter, and you could always put in a question and ask that. But if it's outside and they're sleeping in the park and you're assisting them, that's the same thing we expect that your street outreach people are doing every day. And this is just being done in the COVID environment. Let's look at reporting start dates. First and foremost, this isn't your problem. I mean, I know you think it's your problem because you're always worried about start dates in reporting, and so you've got to decide what those are oftentimes. In this scenario, this is the problem that the recipient has. Should you like to help that recipient, you may. Please don't confuse them. Don't give them more information than they need. But this is the responsibility of the recipient to figure out. I'm going to tell you how we're telling recipients to figure out so you understand the concept. So first of all, we're picking a report start date for this initial period that will go forward for all of your cumulative reporting based on a theory of getting the most people reported correctly. If you have to do that, then the only places that you're going to have to consider in selecting the report start date are the shelters or the street outreach programs. Because the other projects that you have in your HMIS, the RH and homeless prevention projects, those were individual projects that you set up for ESGCV. You didn't commingle them with another project somewhere. So they're a brand new project, and we don't have to worry about running them into a start date where clients didn't exist because there's no clients that are going to get reported until you actually report that project. So we're taking a look at this reporting start date based on the shelters. In this example, we have a big kind of mass shelter, serves 400 people a night, or has 400 beds, serves about 3,000 people a year, different people. Shelter B is a regular family shelter, entry-exit shelter, has 50 beds in it, averages about 800 people a year. And Shelter C is a victim service provider shelter, a little smaller, 25 beds, averages serving about 400 people a year. In this scenario, Shelter A, the big shelter, didn't get money until July 1st. But these smaller shelters got money beginning February 1st. So these two family shelters and victim service provider shelters started ESGCV funding on February 1st. They might have had ESG funding before that, but their ESGCV started February 1st. Obviously, this is the largest shelter. So one would think that we have to play off of this shelter to create the operating start date. In this scenario, that actually works. And let's take a look at why. And this is doing this real simple math just kind of helps the recipient figure out their operating start date. So they line up all their shelters and they say, what's the monthly estimate of the shelter? So how many people did they serve last year? And for the most part, if they're not temporary emergency shelters and they funded them before, they know that because they got the ESG report on them before. They know how many people they were funded. So they take that number, divide it by 12, and get a monthly estimate, right? So here's the monthly estimates. We're going to take those estimates then. So Shelter A, the big shelter, divided by 12, 250 on average a month, different human beings. 250 times 3 months, because July through the end of September, which is when we're going to start the first reporting, is 3 months, 750 people. Come down here and we do the same thing for B and C. So we know how many people are served a month. And we know, on average, in estimate, that that ESG funding these projects should have reported about 1644. It's an estimate, right? It's not rocket science here. It's not perfect. We're not sending it to Mars. We're saying that we're estimating that they should have served about that many people. If we started pulling the reports on all of these shelters beginning February 1st, the big shelter would have reported 2,250 people, not 750. And the other shelters would be reporting their exact counts, right? All of a sudden, we're in this huge overcount situation. And we do not want to be making up numbers and saying we serve more people than we did. We're going to serve enough as it is. We're going to count everybody in shelter, so that's going to be a huge count just right then and there. But we don't need to inflate it by adding beds to the inventory that weren't there before. If we go to July 1st start date, then we're back to the 750 people. We reduce this, and we're at 1,050 people. Therefore, the reporting start date is going to be July 1st for this group of people. You can substitute Shelter A for a street outreach program or Shelter B for a street outreach program. You can add 10 projects to this and do the math. It's going to come out really cleanly when you do the math to show it this way. It is the recipient's responsibility to do this, and they will should be starting the shelter when they gave them the funding. So in theory, the recipient didn't give them funding for ESGCV and say, oh, let's wait 6 months to start that project. They gave them money for ESGCV because it was a crisis and they were supposed to be using it, right? So there shouldn't really be this huge lag time between contracting from the recipient to the subrecipient, and there shouldn't be that much trouble in these dates and when people actually got served. I know what you guys do for a living. I've done it myself. I know it's tough. And I know that for every rule, there's an exception to the rule, and that you're all going to find those exceptions. We're going to call you back to try to get it into this framework wherever possible, and we're going to remind you that this is the problem of the recipient, and they're going to enter that in SAGE, and when they do, when they put the report start date, they've done this math on their own, however they've done that, and they've selected the start date, and that's on them then. You just run the report from the start date they selected.
Michelle, before you move on, can we just clarify one thing real fast?
Sure.
So this question came in, I think it's worth asking out loud. Would the reporting start date be the beginning date of operation or the award time period for the new shelter or other CV project?
It's the date you started serving clients. So it's the beginning of operation. And that's why we're saying that there really isn't this huge there really shouldn't be this huge discrepancy when you're giving emergency funding like ESGCV out to shelters, that you have this huge lag time between the point that you contracted for it and the point that you started.
So they should generally be the same, one might assume, that the operating start date would be the same as the report start date.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe if you renovated a building, it's something different. That would be my only codicil to that one. We're going to show you SAGE for a minute. And we're going to try to do something different in how we do this to help you guys understand who has to do what. So we're going to go through the scenario of what SAGE looks like for the recipient, and I'm going to be the recipient. And then we're going to go through the scenario of what that recipient's HMIS has to do, and Meredith is going to be the HMIS. So hopefully this works, and it'll help you figure out who does what, when, and where, and how does this all happen. Because I think the biggest stress point in this has been, how does this really work? So the recipient first sets their reporting requirements, says they have a contract, and they're all ready to go. It is possible that some of your recipients would not have entered into a grant agreement with HUD yet and wouldn't report in this first period. That's a possibility, and they should communicate with you, or you should communicate with them to make sure that they're starting and that they're ready. Once they have started, all of the forms in SAGE open up for them, and they take that report start date calculation that I just showed you how to do, and they fill it in here. In this scenario, I didn't use the July 1 start date. I used the 2/1 start date just because I had it in there before. So this is where that start date gets used for the first time that I showed you how the recipient calculates it. Once they calculate that, and once they send out the projects to you asking for the uploads, they're not going to be able to change the start date. So they got to get it in there right from the beginning. So you can't say to them, when they tell you you've got to run a report for a given period of time that, oh, you wanted to include another month or two, they can't change it at that point. Now, if it's really, 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 really wrong, we'll work on that with you. But remember that it's not always going to look like you're used to looking at a report that's going to pick up everybody, because in a bundle situation, we can't always pick up everybody. So the report date is set. These are the quarters. They get to set a date that they want the CSVs back to them by. So assuming they sent this out to you on the 1st of the month, it would be reasonable for them to say somewhere around the middle of the month they want it back from you, because they need to balance it and they need to be able to check it in and check it and deal with it if there's something wrong with it, right? So it would be reasonable to think about getting the information from them around the 1st and having to get it done by around the middle of the month. They then go in and enter each one of you. So they enter the name, the organization, and the name of the contact person at each HMIS that they have. Now, I'm showing you an example from Arizona. Arizona has 3 implementations across Arizona, and then they funded a domestic violence shelter. So this could be one implementation if it's a small, a city or a state or a county. But in the case of a state, it's going to be multiple implementations and potentially multiple DV providers. But they've entered this information, so that's how SAGE knows who you are and how to send you the links. They then go in and create the projects. And they enter all of the projects that they have. And for the first period, the project is always the operating start date that we selected at the beginning of the reporting period, and the end date, it's ongoing. It's not closed yet. In the future, in later submissions, they can add another shelter that came online with ESGCV funding and create a new report start date for it as a later date. Maybe they didn't start a project until November, and so for the next reporting period, they're going to enter in November 1st, 2020, and that's going to get entered here. Maybe they closed a project. Maybe they had a temporary emergency shelter that closed. They're going to be able to show when it ends. It's from the start dates and the end dates that are entered here that SAGE puts the projects in bundles. They don't do it. So you don't have to worry that, they've made a mistake or we've got this wrong. If they've entered all their projects correctly, then they go in and they create the bundle. So immediately they see that there's 44 projects that they funded, so they get a clue that they've got them all in, they've got them all right. Here's how many projects of each type they funded. They click a button, and in seconds literally, SAGE comes up and puts all the projects in bundles. So from these 44 projects that started, there were 12 bundles that are going to be generated, and they're going to be generated by 4 different people: the balance of state person, the DV provider, this other implementation, and this other implementation. So they've got, here's your 4 implementations. Here they are. They come up here. If I view them, I can see that they're all there. I can see that they went to the balance of state because that's who they told me they were in. I can see the report range for this. I know the number of projects that are there. When they've got these all in and they viewed and approved each one of them, there's an approved action here that actually happens. They send the bundles. They just click send, and they send the bundles. And that then becomes what you're going to start doing. So Meredith?
Give me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay. Okay, so what you're hopefully seeing on your screen here is the email that I was sent from Sage. So want to put a plug in there. If you're expecting an email and you don't see it, please make sure you're checking your junk mail just in case it went there. And then make sure that you add Sage at sagehmis.info as a safe sender or remove from your junk list, whatever that takes in your system. So I have this email now. It is telling me who has requested this information, who my contact person is in case I have any questions at the recipient, and when they want my data back. The email goes on to tell me what I should be doing here. Let's see, there we go. It provides me a link to the portal. It tells me that I need to review this link within 24 hours, so within 1 business day. And I need to make sure that I'm letting the recipient know if there are any issues at all when I'm reviewing this. So that's where I'm going to contact the contact person up here. So if I click on this link, it is going to take me to the reporting portal page. What you're seeing here again is a reiteration of what we've already said, right? Like, so the ESG recipient, this is telling me the period. This should be my information that I am the balance of state HMIS. And this is what I'm going to be looking through to make sure this all looks right within the first 24 hours. So what I've got here is the name of the bundle, the component type for this particular bundle, the date range, the report type, and in this initial period, it's all going to be classified as quarterly, the number of projects that should be in each bundle, the organization name, and the project name. So this might be where maybe the recipient accidentally assigned the wrong project to me as the HMIS balance of state, and it should have gone to one of the other COC HMIS leads. If I see here that, Central Arizona Shelter Services is not one of my projects, that's what I'm going to need to email back to or call the ESG recipient within that first day to let them know to fix that, to remove that, and they will regenerate that bundle so that I can upload the correct information. So after the first 24 hours has passed, you'll see here that there's nothing I can do on this page. I'm really just checking to make sure it's right. I don't have any action items here. I'm not going to see anything here in this action item until either after October 1st or 24 hours after I receive this email. So if you've got a ESG recipient who is, pushing this stuff out already, you're not actually going to be able to do anything until October 1st. But if they generate this after October 1st, then you have 24 hours. So after 24 hours, next time I log back into the reporting portal, I'm now going to see an action step over here. So I'm going to see this Upload Now button. So I have verified that all of these projects are correct. These are the right organizations. These are the right project names. I'm going to click Upload Now. So again, this is reiterating the information we've already said, the recipient, component type, date range, etc. This is, again, a list of all of the individual projects that should be included. This is going to have the organization name as well as the project name. You can see here currently the org ID and the project ID is blank, but once we get through this initial upload, that will be pre-populated if that information is available. So the next step is going to be to actually upload my files. So I have already gone into my HMIS. I have generated the bundle, so the aggregate report of all 7 of those projects for that particular report period. Excuse me. I have saved it to my computer. So I'm going to go select that project, verify I'm not a robot, and upload the report. So this step, that upload step should be very familiar to those of you that have ever uploaded anything in Sage. It is the same process that we go through to upload the file. Sage is validating the file that you upload. So Sage will be counting the number of projects that are included. It is looking for the correct project type. It is looking for the correct date range. So you're going to want to make sure that you're pulling the right projects together, because otherwise it will not pass validation. Just a quick side note on here, we're looking at an emergency shelter component bundle. Keep in mind, for emergency shelters, there may be multiple project types that get folded into that. There may be a type 1, which is a standard shelter. There may be a type 11, which is a day shelter. There may even be some transitional housing projects for those grandfathered transitional housing projects that may get lumped in here too. So you may actually be picking, under the ESG CV shelter component, you may be picking different project types. So just keep that in mind. So once we've uploaded this, it has passed all of the validations. That's great. Now I need to verify the projects that are uploaded. So what we're comparing here is what the ESG recipient has named the project with what the Q4 data has in the CSV upload. So we just want to make sure that we're matching those projects to make sure that we've got the right projects. Sometimes the names won't be exactly the same, so you'll just want to make sure that you're clear on what's called what. So this is, again, a couple months ago we talked about making sure that we had project names in HMIS that made sense. We've also had this conversation with the ESG recipients to make sure that their project names are something that is recognizable, not just a contract number that you might not know, or some other sort of naming convention that may not make sense. So we're going through here. We are verifying this project goes with this project. We select all of those. We have the ability to look at Q5 here. This is just another double check, an opportunity for you to see the sum total of all of the Q5 data that is uploaded here. So, you might be looking in 95 clients. Yeah, that sounds about right. If it were 5,000 clients, you might think, whoops, I picked up the wrong project in there. And you might want to double check the projects that you've included. So once you have matched all of your projects, you've verified that that data seems to be accurate to the best of your knowledge, you're going to click the Attach to Jurisdiction button. And then that is all that you as the HMIS lead or the victim service provider have to do in Sage. I'm going to toss it back to Michelle here real fast so that she can show you then what the recipient is going to see once you have done that. Michelle, I think you're muted.
It won't let me share my screen now.
Oh, Melissa, can you give it back? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So when Meredith sent the bundle in, I can see right on my dashboard that I have one submission. I view it, and I can see now that that submission is there. I can see just Q4 and 5, so I can see that all of the projects that I asked for were actually in there with clients. And I can see that the entire CSV if I want to. But from Q4 and 5, I get the sense of how many people were served, and for many recipients, they know that that looks about right to them. So that's how it happens. And once they get all of the uploads from all of the HMISs or comparable database providers, they will complete a few other forms, some financial information forms and contact information things, and hit submit and send it on into HUD. And it will go immediately then to the HUD field offices that will take a look at it.
I want to hit just a couple of quick questions here before we move on. There have been some questions about this 24-hour window, and I just want to reiterate, you have one business day, essentially, to review the data that is in the email from the recipient via Sage. You don't have to upload all of the files within 24 hours. You don't have to go generate those bundles. You don't have to submit all of that back to the recipient. You have until the date that the recipient gave you as a deadline to get that data back to them, probably a week or two, to be able to pull all that together. I saw that come through a couple times, so I just wanted to say that one out loud. There was another one. Oh, I think it got assigned. Oh, the other point I wanted to make was I think Michelle said this, there are certainly going to be some recipients who have not served any clients. They haven't allocated any funding. They haven't served any clients. If there have not been any clients served, they're not going to be sending you a request for the ESG CV CSV upload bundle. So you just won't have to do anything this initial reporting period if there are no clients that have been served. Okay, Melissa, I think we can go back to the slides now. Thank you. Brian or Mary, were there other questions? I didn't get a chance to look at all of them in here that we should talk through.
Yeah, sorry about that. What happens if someone finds an issue in email outside of that 24-hour window? What happens then?
Do you want that, Michelle?
What happens if they come in after 24 hours, they find the error after 24 hours?
Yeah,
we have
right.
a major mess in the state.
So
because we're going to have to pull back the bundles and regenerate all of the bundles if you find that you've got something wrong. So maybe it'll be just one other place that we generate the bundles for, or maybe it's going to be the whole shoot match. We don't know. So especially in this first round, if you could really be on your game and take a look at that, that's going to be helpful. After this first round, you shouldn't have it. Sage is going to auto-populate for them, so they're not going to re-enter the projects every time. So once they've done that and you've done that, the only thing that could happen is the bundles themselves change because somebody stopped operating and came out of a quarterly bundle. But otherwise, you're going to find that it's pretty much the same going forward, and not quite the problem it's going to be this first time.
All right, another question, is there going to be a data quality threshold being imposed, like how many missing or don't knows are allowed?
Nope. The validations that are the normal ESG validations will be on, that are on the CAPR now will be on the ESG CV CAPR. So the report's still got to be in balance. It's still got to validate to every question to Q5, but none of the data standards, data quality questions have ever validated, and that's not something that we're looking at this point right now. I mean, we get it. But in this crazy, strange time, you might have missed the Social Security number, right? Get it.
Can you get real specific on what 24 hours means? Is the clock ticking from the moment the email hits your inbox and it's 24 hours later? So even if the email comes 7 p.m. on a weeknight, it's still 7 p.m. the following weeknight, or does it end early on the
Yeah, so
day because the business hours? You got it.
So we took out the weekends, we took out the holidays. If you happen to hit a holiday that it was pressed on, that you get a buy on that. We tried to make it 24 hours of a reasonable period. Does the clock start at the time they push the button? I think so. I will have to check that though. I'm not positive how the programmer started the clock.
Can we kind of promise to get the specifics written down in our FAQ document we always post after the call?
Yep.
So that people are real aware of what that 24-hour calculation.
Yep, I will
Algorithm behind
promise
it.
that.
Let's do them SQL coding even. They can like look at the actual SQL. Just kidding. Fighting for you, HMIS leads. Okay, let's, I'm not seeing any other questions to verbally address. Brian, are you?
Nope, not right now.
Lots of concern on the 24-hour period, so that's very clear. And we'll get as explicit as we can there. Okay. So, Meredith, do you want to wrap up your slides or just want me to go over these? I know one of these resources is new as of yesterday.
Yeah, I can follow up or finish up here. So there is a guide that is coming out for ESG-CV quarterly reporting. It's just not available yet, but that's a question we've been getting a lot. There will be a guide. There is a new resource that was just posted yesterday. You'll see here the ESG-CV quarterly reporting calendar. This tool or this document is really designed to sort of give everyone that we've talked through today, all of the different sort of players in this, what sort of an estimated workflow or timeline might be for this reporting process, right? So that, you know, at the beginning of the month, the recipient is updating projects. In the middle of the month, the HMIS lead is pulling down the bundles and uploading to Sage. Throughout the rest of the quarter, the subrecipients are entering data as usual. You know, so just kind of high level, but hopefully a helpful resource to help everyone sort of wrap their brains around this a little bit more. We also have the Victim Service Provider Comparable Database and Reporting Requirements document, as well as the COVID-19 HMIS resource page. It didn't make it onto this slide for whatever reason, but we'll make sure it's in there for the version we post. There are also pages where the ESG recipient training materials have been uploaded on the HUD Exchange. So we've been doing trainings with the cities and counties and the states and territories. Those have all been recorded, the Q&A logs, the slides, all of that's available on the HUD Exchange. So we'll make sure if you're interested and you wanted to watch those, you could have access to that too.
Okay. I think we will save this for the bulk of the call in October, what we anticipate. So the October call is October 21st, right? You guys will have, you're going to be deep in the middle of this ESG CV upload process at that point. Some of this stuff is just going to shake out these questions and anxieties we're having because we're going to go through it and see what it means and does and is, and that's good. And you have lots of resources, and of course AAQs, you know, enter those to get assistance as we go forward. When we talk again on October 21st, we'll be past the hump of, you know, all the federal partner reports and coordinated entry data elements going live, and, you know, these Sage emails coming out to you as HMIS leads. So lots to, we'll probably touch base on all of those issues again, but we can spend the bulk of the October 21st call, thinking about gearing up for your LSA submissions as well. And so I'm going to just breeze past these slides and we'll go in detail. They also were shared on the February call this year, so it's not really anything new. We're going to do, of course, logical data quality checks against both client enrollments and paying really close attention to your client enrollment data and making sure it's like logically right according to the data standards, and then of course project setup data and making sure that logically makes sense according to the data standards when you submit your LSA file. So that's a lot to go over. We need to focus on the ESG-CV uploads right now, so we will get to that next time, and hopefully this ESG-CV hunt is a little behind us and we can focus on data quality. And I'll say too, all of the LSA data quality slides that we'll go through next time are kind of should already be part of your data quality strategy, right? Your kind of quarterly approach to cleaning HMIS data and getting things geared up. But we do want to make sure you have that in your head as you gear up for your LSA uploads. Okay. We have our standard resources slide here at the end of every slide deck. Once we post this to the hub, you can click on any of these. We've talked a lot about many of them already throughout this call. We, again, will remind you to go and find those past monthly webinars on the hub and get access to these resources. We post the recording of this and the slide deck and the FAQ, which I think is especially helpful. And please note there is like a regular purge of some sort. We don't know quite what the frequency is, but the hub will, you know, think you're not active if you don't log in on some regular schedule. So at least once a year, we think. So again, our next call is October 21st. We can kind of sit here for the next 8 minutes and address any remaining questions that are out there. Go over things that are not making sense that would be easy to clarify on this call. What's the flavor of the questions right now, folks?
People are wondering if they can have a ballpark of a range of dates as when they can expect that initial verification email from Sage.
Are you taking that, Michelle?
The report is open right now for recipients to be putting their projects in if they want to. For those people that have done that, it's reasonable to think that you would get something around the first of the month. If they don't start doing anything in Sage till the first of the month, it's going to take them a good day or two at least to put it in before you get it. So I'm going the first of the month to the 7th maybe as that kind of reasonable period of how long it's going to take them to get you this first one.
And just to, you know, reiterate what we've said several times over the last several months, if you haven't been in contact with your ESG recipient, you might want to do some outreach, have some conversations with them so that you're on the same page for when this is all going to be coming down from their end, just to keep this clear and moving along as easily as possible.
We have asked them all to reach out to you. I think in this call before, you were asked to reach out to them, so hopefully between those two asks, somebody reached out to somebody and there's a connection made and you've begun talking already. So we're hoping that you're in the loop now, and if you're not in the loop with what they're doing and what, you know, their time frame and what they're thinking, please call them. If you don't know who to call, let us know. We'll get you the person to call.
There's another question. Nope. After you, Mary.
How would the recipients know back to the idea of no upload is required if there's no client served. How would the ESG recipients know that no clients were served in HMIS?
Well, probably because you've been in communication with your HMIS and recipients would be in communication with each other. I mean, if nothing else from this whole experience, you're going to get to know your ESG folks as your friends, just like you know your COC leads, right? I'm hoping.
It's all a friendship building activity. I love that.
It is. Isn't that nice?
That's wonderful. Okay, your turn, Brian.
Thank you, Mary. There was a question that came in about a ballpark decision for the point in time count being made, which William answered in the chat, but I figured it was worth repeating on the webinar that as a best guess, and to reiterate a guess, that it would be early October for a 2021 point in time count decision being made.
William.
Oh, well, that's it. That's the answer.
Done. There's a question in here that might be helpful to talk through. What to do if there are multiple ESG funding sources for an emergency shelter overflow. Just so I'm clear on what to do. I don't know if the question is clear, but what if there are other funding sources being used? Does that matter?
So we know that the only place that you have not set up a unique project for ESGCV is in an emergency shelter, possibly a street outreach project. We know that shelters are funded by cities, states, counties, the whole conglomeration, and you're going to have multiple funding sources potentially in one shelter. That's not unusual for you to have multiple jurisdictions funding the same shelter. We know that that you're going to get requests then from the city, the state, the county for those data, and you'll send them. So we recognize it's the good and the bad about how HMIS works, that to not make you figure out when the person is at the front door who the heck is funding their bed tonight. The only way to do this is to count them all and to count them all for each recipient. And so in the case of shelters, when you have multiple funding sources, you're going to count them from whatever start date the different funding source gives you.
Okay. We have somebody pointing out they have a great relationship with their ESG lead, and great, good.
Yay.
But the ESG person is really out of the HMIS loop. So the relationship can be great, and the ESG folks can still be unsure of HMIS stuff. So I think that's part of the anxiety, but so noted. And I guess I would say there's a lot of hands on deck in this thing. We have obviously more people on camera on this call than we normally have. This is an investment that we're all making, and I know HUD is intent on making to try and make this go smooth for everyone. How many trainings did you have the last 2 weeks, Meredith? 27?
Yes.
Okay,
but it's also
hey,
$4 billion that we're talking about, too. So I think
huge.
That's helpful to keep that context. This is a lot of money, a lot of programs, a lot of assistance. So it will be a challenge.
And that difference, right, of ESG is at all these multiple jurisdiction levels, whereas we're kind of used to COC being, not so many different entities. I guess, I don't know. Okay, hey Meredith.
Hey Mary.
Did you hear about the new ninja dinosaur?
No.
They're called Universaurus.
Okay.
All right.
I'll reserve judgment. Thanks, Mary.
All right, folks. It's time to hang up and submit those AAQs and keep staying engaged in this conversation with us. And we will talk to you October 21st.
Thank you all so much.
Bye. Thanks, presenters. Thanks, Melissa.
Bye.